Next item of business is portfolio questions, and the usual, to get many people in as possible. Short, crisp questions and succinct answers would be extremely handy. The portfolio is Communities and Local Government. I can remind members that questions 4, 7 and 8 excuse me, are grouped together. When I come to the end of that section, I'll take any supplementaries to that group. Question 1, Alexander Stewart.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to empower local authorities to take decisions that are right for their communities.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. Our programme for government provided an update on the joint local governance review with COSLA. This represents an important opportunity for our councils, wider public service partners and communities to develop place-based proposals for alternative governance arrangements which reflect the principle of subsidiarity and our commitment to local democracy.
Alexander Stewart, please.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. As we enter a second spike in the pandemic, jobs are at risk, homelessness is on the rise, and services are being forced with massive pressures as never before. Therefore, can the Cabinet Secretary give assurances that proper resources will be made available to ensure all local authorities can meet the ever-increasing demands for their communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. And we have provided local authorities with resources to help some of the challenges that we have all faced over the last 6 months. And of course, we recognise the future challenges around jobs and some of the issues that Alexander Stewart outlined. I would say in terms of resourcing, though, that has been the subject of quite regular discussion between my colleague Kate Forbes and the UK Government. And she has set out a list of things, pretty pragmatic requests to try and bring about some more and further flexibility so that it would enable local authorities to respond to the particular challenges and their needs. So again, I would make the plea to Alexander Stewart, if he recognises the financial challenge that we're all facing, whether he would lend his support to the calls made by my government colleague.
Before I call Sarah Boyack for a short supplementary, could you just adjust your microphone a little bit, apparently? Sarah Boyack, and then I'll take Shona Robinson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I follow up with the Cabinet Secretary and say that our local government colleagues are regularly lobbying us on the need for more powers and flexibility, which are at the Scottish Government's hands at the moment. So can she commit to pursuing on issues such as the tourism levy and replacing the council tax and giving councils that financial flexibility to enable them to come out of the pandemic? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
So again, my colleague Kate Forbes is in regular contact with COSLA on the financial situation of local government. In fact, the fiscal element of the local government review is something that she's actively pursuing with local government. Again, though, perhaps Sarah Boyack would also like to lend her support to the calls that Kate Forbes has made to the UK Government to enable them, to enable local authorities to have the flexibility they need to meet the financial challenge that they're facing. And we'll continue to work with local government to continue to support them in the way that we have over the last 5 or 6 months in face of the global pandemic, and continue to work with them as we collectively try to support the communities that we both represent.
Shona Robinson, briefly, please.
I mean, on that point, we've seen communities pulling together during the coronavirus crisis, and can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to say a bit more about how the Scottish Government has supported organisations and authorities to do so?
Cabinet Secretary, briefly, please.
Yeah, we at the start of the pandemic, I announced the £350 million of community support, which went to local authorities, to the third sector, and to communities themselves, and also enhanced the support around, for instance, the Scottish Welfare Fund. So at an individual level, if people required additional support, they were able to access that from the Scottish Welfare Fund. But more importantly, what we've seen across the whole of Scotland has been the way that communities have responded, and they have accessed the Support and Communities Fund, the Wellbeing Fund, to enable them to support the communities as best they can. That good practice is something we want to build on, and that's exactly what we're doing through the Social Renewal Advisory Board, to capture what that partnership work and what that has achieved, and enable us to move forward together and in partnership to deliver for communities in the future.
Question 2, Claire Baker.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that independent food banks have seen at least a doubling in demand for emergency food parcels compared with last year.
Cabinet Secretary.
The rise in food insecurity seen during the pandemic is deeply concerning. That's why we've invested over £110 million to tackle food insecurity, including ensuring free school meal provision over the summer holidays. We know the main reason, though, for food bank use is low income. That is why we back calls from IFAN, Trussell Trust and countless others for the UK Government to reverse benefit cuts and extend the furlough scheme to provide financial protection for those who need it. The UK Government could also follow Scotland's example, where we're tackling child poverty head-on with the new Scottish Child Payment.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. I recently visited Lochgilly Lunches and they were grateful for the supplies they received through the Food Fund, but expressed concern it was coming to an end as concerns were growing over redundancies and unemployment. While the announcement today of the Job Support Scheme might provide some relief, we still expect to see a drop in household incomes, and other food projects predict ongoing demand over the winter. What consideration is the Scottish Government giving to extending the Food Fund, as many lockdown restrictions are continuing and increasing?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, actively considering what we can do next, because precisely for the reasons that Claire Baker outlines, we are coming into a particularly challenging time where the days are getting shorter, nights longer, the colder weather is happening, people are going to be financially struggling, and the need will continue to be there. So we're actively considering the options about how to work through what support we can put in place, and we'll keep the member updated as to what that means in practice. But it will undoubtedly be a really challenging time, and that's why it will continue to need for us to work with our local government partners and the third sector that she highlighted to make sure that we can support people as best as we can going forward.
Question 3, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether community councils have been able to fully contribute to local government during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Cabinet Secretary.
Local authorities have statutory oversight of community councils under the Local Government Scotland Act 1973 and are responsible for ensuring their community councils are fully able to contribute to local government. Complementing this, the Scottish Government has worked closely with both COSLA and the Improvement Service to ensure community councils have the support they need during the pandemic.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Minister for that answer. During the pandemic, Highland Council have effectively removed community councils out of planning decisions. I believe this makes communities feel more isolated. Will the Scottish Government commit to ensuring that community councils are properly resourced and continued to be involved in the future in local planning decisions?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'd be interested to hear further, so if the member wanted to kind of get in contact with myself to let us know some of the concerns he has, we've been able to look at that a bit more closely. More generally, though, we have been working with our community council liaison officers, and we work with COSLA to make sure that community councils have been supported during the pandemic. It is something that I most recently spoke to Alison Everson about, and will commit to ensuring that support is in place, and that the structures around support for community councils are as adequate as they can be. I'm kind of conscious that sometimes the model scheme of establishment hasn't necessarily always been as flexible for the community councils during the last 5 or 6 months, and again that's something I'll commit to look at. But if the member wants to write to me about some of the specific concerns he has, I'll certainly look into that, because we want to ensure that the democratic structures that we have in place are functioning as best they can given the challenges that we are working in.
Question 4, Julia Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taken to help local authorities recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Cabinet Secretary.
To provide further financial assistance, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance wrote to the Chancellor of the Exchequer on the 9th of September seeking approval for a package of financial flexibilities that would allow Scottish councils to address the short and medium-term funding pressures they face due to COVID-19, and a response is still awaited. While we welcome the additional COVID-related funding received from the UK Government, it is not enough, and the Scottish Government will continue to press the UK Government for additional financial support and fiscal flexibilities for both the Scottish Government and local authorities, and we welcome any support this Parliament can provide in this respect.
Julia Martin.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Community resilience groups have been invaluable throughout the pandemic in assisting local authorities with reaching the most vulnerable people. What steps can be taken to support and enhance the work of these groups as we go forward?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, and I would absolutely concur that community resilience groups have been incredibly important. The country's resilience wouldn't have been what it is had it not been for the endeavour of many volunteers and community groups doing what they did to keep people looked after. And that's been, I hope, in part supported by the announcement of the £350 million that we outlined in the 18th of March. But also we want to move from the immediate response to recovery, so we'll now be refocusing part of the Communities Fund into a community and third sector recovery programme, and that will include business support and investment to help organisations adapt their operations and income generation to increase sustainability. And the funding will also support community groups in the wider third sector responding to the ongoing impact of the pandemic. And further to that, Shirley-Ann Somerville and I, as I mentioned to Shona Robeson, have also established the Social Renewal Advisory Board to capture good practice and build on what we've seen happening across our communities to ensure that we can support them to go forward and do and continue that good work.
Question 7, Alexander Burnett.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the support it is providing to local authorities in their response to COVID-19.
Cabinet Secretary.
To date, the Scottish Government have committed to £379 million of additional direct grant support for local authorities, a further £972 million of general revenue grant to replace the potential loss of non-domestic rates through income resulting from the COVID-19 rates relief measures, £135 million over the next 2 years to help support the return to school, and up to £100 million to support the challenges in the social care sector, which will be provided through integration authorities.
Alexander Burnett.
Local authorities are struggling under cuts from this SNP government to fund vital local infrastructure maintenance, and none more so than Aberdeenshire and its network of bridges. Now, Park Bridge in my constituency is just one where 2 communities are now divided. So what additional support can the Minister give to support strained budgets so that the current backlog of maintenance can be dealt with to keep our communities united?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I don't recognise the characterisation of the financial situation as a result of this government's actions. In fact, it should be noted that Scotland's local authorities have enjoyed a cash terms revenue budget increase of 3.6% over the period 2013-20, despite a decade of UK government austerity. And I think it's also kind of appropriate to be looking at the situation where our English authorities, which have faced a cash terms revenue budget reduction of 14.7% over the same period. That's an equivalent real terms reduction of 22.8%. But on the matter of the bridge, that it will be so important to his constituents, that is a matter for the local authority to be looking at and to be considering, given that we have provided resource. But we recognise it's challenging. So if the member wants to write to us, we can engage in a constructive way. But I think he needs to frame his questions in a slightly different way, because we do want to make sure that the current situation that people are enduring is not made worse by decisions that are not going to be conducive for our community to flourish.
Question 8, Keith Brown.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it's made of the impact of COVID-19 on local government services.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I appreciate that local government has been at the heart of the response to COVID-19, working tirelessly to respond to local circumstances in order to keep the most vulnerable in our society safe and essential services available. The Scottish Government is working closely with local government, predominantly through COSLA and Solace, to understand how best we can support them and to identify priority areas that may require support during this challenging period. The Scottish Government, recognising the challenging operating environment facing local authorities, we have provided additional financial support and significant flexibility to enable authorities to respond to local issues and provide communities across Scotland with the services that they expect and deserve at this time.
Keith Brown.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer? She'll know that due to the crucial role that local authorities have played in delivering services in response to the pandemic, every single council in Scotland is forecasting a significant funding shortfall, which can only impact on the future delivery of local services. Collectively, all councils in Scotland made a request of the Chancellor to grant a break on Public Works Loan Board repayments to give councils some much-needed financial breathing space after the UK Government unilaterally imposed an increase in the interest charges. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the UK Government should reverse this decision, which would go a long way to supporting our local councils and to help protect vital local services?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely, I would absolutely agree with what Keith Brown sets out, and again I would underline and point again to the letter and the representations that my colleague Kate Forbes has made to the UK Government, in particular to the Chancellor, to get approval for a package of those crucial financial flexibilities, including a loans fund repayment holiday that would allow our councils to address the short and medium term pressures that they face due to COVID-19. So we also await a response to that. I would also add that what doesn't make it any easier is the postponement of the UK budget, which makes all of this far more difficult. And again, if that's something that my colleagues in the Conservative benches can raise with their colleagues, we would be really grateful. We're not precious about who gets the answer. If you can do it, please do it, because it's critical for the communities that we all represent, taking off our party political hats. This is a nonsense that we're having to deal with some of the uncertainties that are being pushed upon us, and I would certainly hope that the UK Government responds positively.
A brief supplementary, Patrick Harvey, then followed by Alec Rowley.
Thank you. Councils are affected not only directly but also via commercial operations that they own. Is the Minister aware of the situation at the SEC owned by Glasgow City Council, where hundreds of workers have already been dismissed or removed from furlough before the furlough ended without consultation? And this after many years of concerns about the employment standards that they face and the way that they're treated. Does the Minister agree that the employer must immediately suspend those notices of termination and begin a proper consultation? Surely our publicly owned businesses...
Mr Harvey, that's not brief. Sorry,
expect
it's not.
better than this.
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for raising the issue. I can pledge to engage with my colleagues in Glasgow City Council to make sure that they are doing all that they can to support people at this time. On a broader general principle, we would want people to be treated with dignity, especially when it's so uncertain at this point in time. So again, I'll pledge to make sure that I can engage with them to see if there are any ways in which we can address some of the concerns that the member has outlined.
Alec Rowley, followed by Bill Kidd.
Presiding officer, one of the impacts was that a lot of local authorities stopped allocating houses when COVID came along. Many authorities have yet to start their allocations. The housing problems are just stacking up and stacking up. Is the government going to intervene and try and get housing moving again in Scotland? Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for raising a really important issue, and of course it has been challenging over the last 6 months. We're really pleased though that Fife has started its allocations this week, and my colleague Kevin Stewart continues to engage with all authorities to make sure that the support to get things moving in the way that the member outlines is able to happen as quickly as possible. But again, we're really pleased that Fife has been able to start this week.
Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that partnership work between the Scottish Government, COSLA, local authorities and the third sector has been key to providing support where is most needed, bringing forward local authority grants, the removal of some ring fencing and the rollout of the Supporting Communities Fund for the third sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur with that. It has been critical, not just the individual actions from the individual organisations that Bill Kidd has mentioned, but it's been that collective effort with people rolling up their sleeves, getting on with the job and focusing on the task in hand. Sally Thomas from the Scottish Federation of Housing Association, I think, borrowed a phrase which I think is really apt. It's no silos, no logos, no egos. People just focusing in what needs to be done. And that has been what has enabled the country to show the resilience that it has and has enabled us to generate the outcomes, positive outcomes that we've seen. What we now need to do is capture that spirit, not just have that prompted because of a pandemic, but actually work out what were the ingredients that enabled that to happen so that we can continue that good work going forward.
Question 5, Ruth Maguire.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taken since 2019 to ensure that social housing rents are affordable to tenants.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Individual social landlords are responsible for setting rents in consultation with their tenants and are required by the Scottish Social Housing Charter to set these at a level that tenants can afford. We continue to have a clear interest in rent affordability, and even more so given the current economic circumstances. Before passing costs on to tenants, landlords should look closely at how they can manage their organisations effectively to keep rent levels as affordable as possible. And we are also continuing our work to drive procurement efficiencies in the social sector to offset other upward pressures on rents. When assessing grant applications for our record over £3.5 billion investment in affordable housing, we check that proposed RSL rents at completion are in line with our published social rent benchmarks.
Ruth Maguire, briefly, please.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Whilst I understand that the Scottish Government can't dictate to social landlords and that they do have this process to go through to check affordability, I have examples of where that's not happening, and it's important that it's affordable to the constituent, not just about the process that people have gone through. Can I ask the Minister for some advice on how to best address this, please?
And Minister, briefly too.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Ms Maguire for that question. I think first and foremost, engagement with the Housing Association themselves to make sure that the consultation when it comes to rent rises is right. Most RSLs do that absolutely brilliantly, but what I would not want to see is a situation where lip service is being paid to consultation, and I'd be happy to hear from Ms Maguire around about that. But I think one of the key things which I can do is to make sure that new homes are set at the right rent benchmark level. And in terms of our investment in North Ayrshire, we've provided £16 million for affordable housing in the last wee while, and all of those completions RSLs have made for us have had that affordable level absolutely bang on the mark.
James Kelly.
Shelter Scotland revealed earlier this week that there were 70,000 children in social housing waiting lists. Completely unacceptable situation. This is compounded by years of SNP cuts to local councils in areas like Glasgow and South Lanarkshire. So can I ask the Minister, when are the SNP going to start taking housing seriously, reverse these cuts and let councils get in a position to reverse the housing shortage and deal with issues like rents and repairs?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I don't want to see anybody in waiting lists, and that's why this government has delivered over 90,000 affordable homes since coming to power in 2007. I would remind Mr Kelly that in the last Labour government, all they managed to deliver was 6 council houses. 6 council houses, all in Shetland. Can I say that we will continue to invest in social housing? And I would also remind Mr Kelly that his colleague Ian Gray said that while the former government put the right homelessness legislation in place, they didn't build the homes to deal with what was required. We have delivered and will continue to do so.
Question 6, Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, what action it is taking to work with local authorities and third sector organisations to help protect our vulnerable people.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. We have worked closely with partners, including local authorities, the third sector and community organisations to support individuals most at risk during the pandemic. Backed by initial investment of £350 million through our communities funding package, we have made over £110 million available to tackle food insecurity, announced £43 million to tackle digital exclusion, and made over £80 million in awards to community and third sector organisations to take forward projects which support the well-being of individuals across Scotland. We also set out in the programme for government our intention to establish a new community and third sector recovery programme to continue to support people and communities in responding to the ongoing impact of the pandemic.
Briefly, Mr Corrie.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response. What support is the Scottish Government going to give to local authorities also to help regenerate local communities like Western Bartonshire, my region, which is the third most deprived area in Scotland, to address the inequalities of health and wealth with a long-term solution?
Cabinet Secretary.
We set out in the programme for government our commitment to community-led regeneration. It was £275 million within the programme for government, if my memory serves me correctly, and that should enable communities like you've described to be able to access funds and support to try and take forward projects that are close to them. And we also recognise that way of regenerating our communities is far more sustainable if it's community-led and supported. There are other areas that we can probably explore around how we can support and improve the health and well-being of people in the most deprived communities. I also set out our progress report to tackling child poverty just the other month, which set out the range of commitments that we've taken forward to support people living in poverty, and our intention to open up applications to the Scottish Child Payment, which will help reduce child poverty when they start the payments in February.
Thank you very much. That concludes portfolio questions. I thank the Cabinet Secretary, Ministers and Members who managed to get through all the questions. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business.